proceedings at the state capture inquiry. We're now joined from our Pretoria studio by political analyst Professor Somadoda Fikeni. Prof, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Always a pleasure talking to you. So it's been 2 days that the former president has been sitting on the stand at the Commission of Inquiry. When you look back and reflect on those 2 days, what comes to your mind from what you saw and heard?
Well, I do think that the first one has been consistent with the stance of the former president in his public utterances, as especially whenever he comes from the court cases that he was not guilty. And therefore he stuck to that to say he was not aware or he could not remember or he never met the persons. So much of the evidence presented has been circumstantial in a sense, not very direct. So to that extent, he's been able to stick to his position. The second one, we finally have a glimpse when he said he would reveal some of the secrets as he started, pointing out that Ramatlodi and possibly Nyanda were apartheid spies or they had worked with the intelligence. So to that extent, again, this we've come to expect precisely because former president had worked in the intelligence. Therefore, much of the information he would be saying he's having would be in that frame. But what is bizarre, though, is that if it is true, let's suppose it is true that Ramatlodi was known to have been recruited as a spy. Why would the ANC intelligence, including the former President Zuma, who was the chief of intelligence then, the Joan Tlantlas and others, allow him to work in the very sensitive space of the office of the president of the ANC, then O.R. Tambo, writing speeches and being in some of the inner core group? And why would they then allow him, even after the return, to become a premier and rise, and even allow him to be one of the people who supported Jacob Zuma in his fights with Thabo Mbeki to a point of being appointed in one of the most strategic ministries? That to me remains rather bizarre if you follow that particular logic. Either there was a monumental failure of ANC intelligence to utilize the information if they knew that so-and-so was suspected to be a spy, or it is something else.
All right, so in his defense, he did say that there were a number of people that they knew were in this situation, but he said that he believed that once everyone came back, that they would leave all of those ways behind them and that they would start afresh on a new page. And that's what he had hoped. That's what he said in his testimony. Is that enough for you?
I doubt really that it is enough, in a sense that I've just pointed to you that working in the most sensitive office of the president of an organization which is at war, in a liberation struggle, right in his office would not be probable for a person who is known or even suspected, because they would have easily moved him to some other office. In any event, remember that intelligence services and the infiltration of liberation movement works at different levels. The first one could be a person knowingly becomes a spy and therefore is used to infiltrate. The second one, a person not aware that he's being used, could actually be, used as a source because the secondary person close to him is feeding the information back and forth. The third one might be the person is not even a spy, but the intelligence service of the apartheid agents always threw these names in to sow divisions through disinformation. So those are all equal probabilities to say if you wanted to further divide the liberation movement, throw as many names so that the suspicion, the disunity is sustained.
All right, let's take a look at how he was on the stand over 2 days. Day one perhaps was a little bit easier because he was telling his story in his own words. Day two, he was now facing question after question. How do you think he performed? Because the public have to make up their mind, the judge has to make up his mind that we have a credible witness in front of us who's telling us the whole truth.
Well, I do think that his performance is consistent with the position he has always maintained, that one, he is not guilty, and two, there is a giant conspiracy against him, and anything happening to him is that conspiracy. So nothing changes. I think his constituency will simply, embrace that as consistent. However, where there is seemingly a failure, there is a failure to make a distinction between legal technicalities of accountability as to whether a person is involved in corruption or state capture or not. And the other one, the ethical, broad political accountability, where you show some degree of remorse to say, now that I know certain things happened even under my administration, even if I was not directly involved, then I take accountability and I ought to have done things differently to make sure that such do not happen. That we are not even able to touch on something like the landing of the Guptas in the Air Force Base, which was obviously and blatantly wrong, even by the way of condemnation, to say certain activities of this nature, an abuse of relationship with political leaders, was wrong. We have not seen that, and I think the public might have been looking for that particular aspect, and it is not forthcoming seemingly, and the main focus is the former president being a victim, there being conspiracy on anything that was done. And it's very difficult to understand how, for example, something like landing in the Air Force Base could have been part of the conspiracy, except to say here relationships with political leaders were abused.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about strategy. Do you think that there's a strategy that he's working on? The lawyers seem to be jumping in quite a lot. We haven't seen so much of this throughout the commission. There's a narrative that the commission is treating him unfairly. Do you think that this is a genuine concern, or is this part of a strategy to perhaps paint a picture ahead of whatever might be coming?
Well, I do think that it might be a combination of both, a strategy to make sure that you protect your witness, but at the same time, you also make sure that you chip away credibility of the commission itself. Because one of the strategy is to point out that the commission may not know what it is doing, or may be procedurally unfair in what it is doing, or you may preempt it by trying to limit on what it can ask or what it can do, because this is basically an inquiry to find out information as to what happened. But at the same time, though, one has to ask the strategy of bringing some of the senior heavyweight witnesses or presenters to this commission as to whether it would not have been advisable, one, to go through all these other witnesses, but also to do a lot of forensic work and already say, when you say, do you recall the following? You have paperwork evidence extracted forensically to say this is what we have. Because right now what it means, certain things will be left hanging, and you may have a situation where the former president and other key witnesses may be called back to come and collaborate and come and present further evidence or respond.
All right. He's denied the Guptas influenced him in any way in terms of appointment of ministers. He says he didn't have anything to do with the DGs being moved around. He didn't remember that how Temba Maseko was moved around. Is that something that is on the balance of probabilities, something that is believable?
Well, it is unlikely that there would not have been any influence. A number of things are possible here. Either the Guptas abused their proximity to the president, or the president knew, but because this was not done formally, he then is distancing himself, and of course Collins Shabane is no longer with us to present his side of the story. But it is improbable to say that the Guptas would not have abused their proximity to the president. That one now is quite clear that they understood the proximity. The key question is whether the former president himself knowingly assisted them, and that is what the commission has to test and verify.
Because it is possible, like Ambassador Kolwane said, that these people independently dropped the president's name without his knowledge.
It is possible, but at the same time, we ought to ask a simple and basic fundamental question. These issues were out there in the media, therefore the president was aware that the Guptas were either using his name or abusing their proximity to him to exercise their influence and sometimes get business deals. Why would he not have intervened then to say, not in my name? I gave you one simple example of the Air Force Base, where a head of state in any country would simply say, what has happened is blatantly wrong. Let's find out what the facts are. That in itself is just a basic expectation. So failure to condemn those, that's why I'm saying now we're dealing with a minimalist element of legal technicality. Was I involved or not? Do you have a proof or not? Rather than the broader ethical accountability issue to say, were these things generally wrong or right? Could leaders have prevented them or not?
All right, let's talk a little bit about the politics surrounding this, because we've seen today the Secretary General of the ANC arriving. We've seen former Minister of Finance, Home Affairs, Public Enterprises, Malusi Gigaba arriving, and not many of the other senior ANC party officials. What does that tell us, or should we not read into this at all, as the Secretary General said today, that people are free to come? We are here to support past and future presidents. Is this something that we should read into or not?
Well, this is as simple as, you know, the outcome of Nasrec and the lead up to Nasrec. ANC is a divided party, a deeply divided party. Some within the ANC perceive these efforts, such as investigation into state capture, investigation into state-owned companies, as a witch hunt which is meant to politically purge them. Whereas Cyril Ramaphosa and some other leaders of the ANC see these as part of their campaign platform where they promise to fight corruption. There lies the dilemma. So, in this particular space, as others see this as an existential crisis, you're about to see one of the most dreadful as well as the most, intense and sometimes dirtiest of fights within the ANC, using the different entities as a proxy, because one side believes that it is a political purge and a conspiracy. The other side believes that this is a normal process of fighting corruption, as long as you have a clash of perspectives. And in the space of conspiracies, conspiracies are so hard to prove and they are so difficult to disprove. They just hang around like a cloud in the air. And the worst thing in these particular cases, where accusations come, they are dropped, not tested, not verified for their validity, and it is left to those who are being named to come and clear themselves. So in this particular case, I would simply say it is the struggle for the soul of the ANC, but also the struggle for survival.
All right. Professor Somadoda Fikeni, that's where we'll leave it for today. Thanks very much indeed, as always, for your insights. Thank you.